The Legend of Pin Oak. In 1868, a Kentucky artist, Thomas Satterwhite Noble, painted The Price of Blood, which shows the sale of a mulatto slave by his father-master to illustrate the cruelty of slavery. There is no greater horror than a system that allows parents to sell their children, or, as in this story, brother to sell brother. The plantation bell summoned everybody to the big house. About 50 slaves, including the inside help, gathered in front of the white mansion. Among them were Henri and his wife, Charlemae. Harper McAvoy, looking pale and weak, stood beside one of the big Doric columns that supported the second-story porch. After nervously clearing his throat, he announced in a not-so-steady voice, "I've sold Henri." One of the slaves screamed, Charlemae perhaps. Harper didn't know for sure. As he hurried back inside the house, voices called after him. "No, not Henri. Massa, what about Charlemae and the baby? Who will see after things round here? What will become of us all?" Harper raced to his study, where he barricaded himself against the onslaught of questions. "I sold Henri," he said, giggling foolishly. "I did it. Now I'll be rid of him." Suddenly the door to his study burst open. "Do you hate me that much?" Henri asked without hesitation. "Enough to destroy Pin Oak?" Harper scurried behind his desk to put a barrier between them. "I owe you no explanation. You're my slave." Harper's resentment of Henri began in childhood. Actually, their story started with Amos McAvoy, the former master of Pin Oak. Amos had inherited the estate from his father, Thomas McAvoy, who had built it in the same year Thomas Jefferson was elected President of the United States. Only Andrew Jackson's Hermitage equaled Pin Oak's graceful architectural styling and elegant setting. Amos McAvoy had been a tall, red-headed man with a square-cut chin and deep-set green eyes. He courted the lovely Alva Dean from Spring Manor and won her over with his dashing style and devil-may-care charm. Their spring wedding united two old Tennessee families, the Deans and the McAvoys, two fortunes and two hearts. But the marriage lasted only a year. That night they told Amos that Elva had died in childbirth. He locked himself in her room and wept bitterly. When Amos finally emerged the next morning, he named his son Harper, then abandoned Pin Oak, leaving it to be run by the overseers. For 10 years, Harper saw Amos only a few weeks during harvest season. The rest of the time, his father stayed in New Orleans. The boy was left in the charge of his grandmother Dean, who showered him with everything her money could buy. But material possessions and her love were no substitute for the thing he most desired, his father's acceptance. "He would rather I had died," Harper told his grandmother, and no matter how much Amanda Dean tried to deny it, they both knew it was true. To ease his pain, Harper taught himself not to care. Then one day, Amos unexpectedly arrived at the Dean's Spring Manor. Harper slipped down the steps and stood outside the parlor where he listened to the conversation. "I'm returning to Pin Oak," Amos said, "and I want my son to come live with me." "There's nothing I can do to stop you," Amanda answered coldly. "But why now, after all these years? You've never taken the slightest interest in the boy before." "I know, and it was wrong," he admitted. "But I plan to make it up. I've left my affairs in the care of others far too long." Amanda sighed deeply. "Harper is a complicated child. I don't think he knows how to be happy. I spoiled him, I know. Perhaps it will be good for him to be with you. Yes, from now on, things will be better." Harper had lived at Pin Oak for about a month, when his father announced that he was going to New Orleans. He returned several weeks later with Henri, a mulatto child about 2 years younger than Harper. The boy had a mop of dark red hair, a square chin, and unusual pale green eyes. Gossip spread quickly from the big house to the quarters. Say the boy's mama was one of them free blacks down in New Orleans, Harper overheard the cook tell the driver. Got his mama's skin and his daddy's green eyes. An odd combination. That's for sure. Anybody with eyes can clearly see that Henri is Massa Amos' own flesh and blood. Harper saw that what everybody else saw. The McAvoys were big, strong, athletic men with ruddy complexions. Henri, though younger, was taller and more solidly built than Harper, a frail child with the same pastel features as his mother. Harper hated the way he looked and despised Henri for looking so much like their father. What was worse, Amos never denied a word of the gossip. Even if he had, it wouldn't have stopped the tongues from wagging. So it's all true, Amanda Dean gasped when she came to pin up, immediately to see Henri. She fell into a chair and fanned herself, then turned to Amos. You and that boy are the talk of 2 counties. Now I see why. Amos sent Henri on an errand so that he could speak freely to Amanda. The child's mother is dead, and I didn't want him with somebody who might mistreat him. How dare you shame my grandson with this abomination? I've come to take Harper back to Spring Manor. No, the boy stays here, he answered. Henri will be a good companion for Harper. I brought him home for that purpose. Are you so blind? Amanda said, pointing an accusing finger. This can only lead to disaster. Amos ignored his mother-in-law's counsel and installed Henri as a house servant. In time, Henri was put in charge of Amos' stables. Pin Oak's horses were some of the finest in the state, and Amos was a gifted horseman. Henri enjoyed taking care of Hercules, Amos's prized stallion. Harper, on the other hand, stayed as far from the stables as possible. Horses made him sneeze, and riding them made him sore. I'm hot, Harper complained when Amos took both boys out to view the fields. And besides, I'm not interested in how cotton grows. Stop whining, Harper, Amos scolded. You'll be master of Pin Oak one day, and Henri, you'll run the place. That's the way I want it. The season passed swiftly, until at last Henri reached manhood, tall, confident, and strong. Harper's jealousy of Henri grew each year until it dominated his life, and he was immersed in an ever-widening pool of anger and hatred. Just as Amos planned it, Henri was put in charge of Pin Oak operations. Soon after, Amos approved his marriage to Charlemae, a beautiful African woman. Together, they built a cabin with a stone fireplace, wood floors, and shuttered windows. It was until then that Amos told Henri he was free. Your mama was freed by her master when she was born. I never told you before now because I didn't want you running off when you were too young to take care of yourself. You're 25 and the law says I have to let you go. I've always known I was free, Henri said. My mama told me many times before she died. Will you be leaving Pin Oak? Amos asked. Henri sighed. No, because Charlemae belongs to you, and she couldn't come with me. I'll stay and keep running Pin Oak, but for a salary, and I want to use that salary to buy Charlemae's freedom. A wise decision, Amos said. As long as Amos lived, Henri was safe. Then one Christmas, Amos took sick at the dinner table, believing it to be indigestion brought on by too much eggnog. Henri helped Amos to his bedroom. By the time they realized it was something far worse, it was too late. He's asking for his son, Dr. Shipp said, turning first to Henri, then to Harper. After an embarrassing moment, the doctor said to Harper, He's asking for you. Do hurry. He's near death. Brushing past Henri, Harper went into his father's bedroom. I'm here. Amos held out his trembling hand, and for a split second, Harper wanted to embrace his dying father and forget everything that had gone wrong between them. Instead, he stood in stony silence. Henri, Amos struggled to say. Tell him. But Amos McAvoy died before he could finish. Henri to the last, Harper hissed. Not even a parting word for me. He sat in the darkened room for a while. Then he started laughing. a chuckle that turned into a shrill giggle. When the doctor and Henri rushed in to see what was happening, Harper looked at them with wild eyes. "I am the master of Pin Oak." "Did he say anything about freeing Charlemae and my son?" Henri asked some weeks after the funeral. "He promised Charlemae and me." "No. In fact, my father suggested I sell you," Harper lied. "But of course I'd keep Charlemae and your baby." "Does that bother you, Henri? Knowing you're just a slave after all?" Henri looked for signs of hurt in Henri's face. He saw only his father's contemptuous green eyes staring defiantly back at him. "Go, get out." Harper waved Henri away. But his brother didn't leave. Though Henri saw no point in telling Harper he was a free man, there was another matter he needed to discuss. "There's something you should know," he said with urgency in his voice. "Pin Oak is in trouble." "What kind of trouble?" Harper asked, growing nervous. "For the past 2 years, the crops haven't come in healthy. Too much rain one year, not enough the next. Still, Master Amos said if we towed the line, cut a few corners, and brought in a good crop this year, we could get through these hard times." Harper turned his back on Henri. "How dreary. Do what you must to keep the place going." But meanwhile, Harper continued to spend Pin Oak's money on good whiskey and bad deals. It wasn't long before the bank threatened foreclosure. Driven by years of anger and resentment, Harper met the bank's demand payment by selling the most valuable asset he had, Henri. "You fool!" Mr. Kelsey, a longtime family friend at the bank, shouted when Harper told him. "Why didn't you sell the silver? Sell all the furniture? Not Henri! Would a carpenter sell his saw?" But the deed had been done. Harper sat in his office, listening to a slave sing a mournful tune. "Steal away, steal away, steal away home. I ain't got time to stay here." He, too, longed to steal away to a peaceful place. If only for a moment, he drifted off to sleep. Harper. Opening his eyes, Harper saw his father. No, it was only Henri. "Do you think you might try saying, sir, or Massa Harper?" he said sarcastically. "I've come once more to plead with you to reconsider." "Sorry, but there's nothing I can do. I sold you." "But that's just it. You can't sell me," Henri said carefully. "I'm free because my mother was free. You know the law. When my mother died, your father came to New Orleans to get me, but he knew the condition of my birth. That's why he couldn't sell me. Neither can you." Harper's eyes stretched wide with anger and frustration. Where are your papers?" he asked incredulously. "Can you show me some papers?" "Here." Harper read the document and swore. "He never told me. You mean you were always free to go? Why didn't you just leave?" "I couldn't abandon Charlemae and our baby. Besides, Master Amos was letting me build cash credits to buy my family's freedom. I should be close to my goal. I can't imagine my father making such a deal. Master Amos must have kept records. Won't you at least look?" Harper ignored the question. He rubbed his temples. "The dealers are coming tomorrow," he whined. "Oh, they do terrible things to people who renegade on sales." "What must I do?" "Give them their money back." "I've spent it." But slowly an idea formed in Harper's head. As it grew and took shape, he smiled. "Since you're free, I'll give them Charlemae in your place. If you want, you can follow her and offer your services to her new master. I'll keep your son, of course. That seems a fair deal, don't you think?" "What? Why?" "Why not? You always got everything you wanted. But now I'm in charge." Henri started to walk away but turned back. "You always envied me, but there was no cause," he said. "How do you think I felt having to call my own father Massa Amos? I used to watch you whine and fret, and he'd remind you that one day you'd be master of Pin Oak. I ran Pin Oak for him, kept it afloat, but in the end he called you to his bedside." Henri shook his head. "You never understood." Then he left. Dawn brought the slave dealers as promised. Beautiful morning, don't you think? We've come for the buck, one man said gruffly. The other one took an ankle cuff and chain from his pack. Fetch him. There's a slight problem. We're listening. Unfortunately, Henri is a free man, Harper said apologetically. Seems he was born free. The sale I made was illegal. One of the men spat tobacco juice. Who ever heard of a free nigger in Tennessee? We're taking him, papers or no. Go fetch him. A nod from Harper set a slave child scurrying toward the quarters. Within seconds, he returned yelling, "They gone! They gone!" Who's gone? Where? Henri, Charlemae, and the boy. They gone. Cabin empty. The dealers mounted quickly. You got dogs? I do. Get your horse. We'll track 'em. And they rode off. I don't ride, Harper called. I'll be along in the carriage. The men followed Henri and Charlemae through the orchards and along Tops River. The trail was easy to follow. The dogs reached the clearing first. They had cornered their quarry. The runaways had climbed a steep cliff and were huddled on a ledge, jutting out over the crashing water. Their backs were to the falls, with no chance for escape. The dogs barked and tried to climb the wet, slippery rocks. Henri called out to the lead dog, Blue. Hearing his voice, all the dogs stopped, yelping and wagged their tails in friendly recognition. The slave dealers bolted into the clearing. Harper followed minutes later. Come down from there, boy. We got no time for this. There ain't no place else to run, so bring yourself down with the woman. But instead of backing down, Henri and Charlemae inched forward to the edge of the cliff. Then, after handing the baby to Henri, Charlemae leaped into the water. A split second later, Henri, the boy clutched tightly to his chest, leaped too. Harper scrambled from his carriage and struggled to climb the cliff. Finally reaching the spot where Henri had stood moments before, he looked down, and his frightened brown eyes searched the churning waters. Suddenly, miraculously, Harper saw a large, beautiful bird rise out of the mist. It hovered overhead, circling. Another bird, a female, joined her mate. Screeching loudly, a fledgling flapped frantically to stay in flight. The parents waited patiently until the little one gained confidence. Once the three were airborne, the bird circled, then flew north. No, Harper cried. Come back, you always win. The ledge began to crumble. The men tried to call to him, warn him, but it was too late. The ground gave way, taking Harper McAvoy into the crashing waters below. They found his body downstream, but they never found a trace of Henri, Charlemae, or their child. The authorities called Harper's death a terrible accident. The others were listed as suicides. But the driver who had been part of the search told a different story. Down in the quarters, he told about a slave family who leaped into the Tops River Falls but weren't killed. They were transformed into beautiful birds who flew away to freedom. Legends grew up around Pin Oak. After Harper's death, the house went to Mr. Kelsey at the bank, but it was destroyed by fire during the Civil War. Olive Hill had grown up in the shadow of Pin Oak ruins. 2 of the 6 Doric pillars and a burned-out chimney were all that was left of the stately old mansion. Whenever Papa had gone fishing, Olive liked to tag along behind him through the plantation grounds and down to Tops River Falls. There he would tell her the legend of Pin Oak. After 25 years of telling it, Papa's Pin Oak story was always the same. Olive never tired of hearing it, and she had even made it to the subject of a paper she was writing. For months she'd searched through old records, documents, books, and papers to see how much of the real story she had reconstructed. The Diary of Benjamin Stone, a well-known abolitionist and conductor on the Underground Railroad, had just been published, and it contained information she needed. When the Reader bookstore called to her that her copy had arrived, she hurried over to pick it up. Driving to the mall, Olive mentally sorted through all the details she had uncovered about Pin Oak. Henri, a mulatto, was the son of Mary Dupriest, a free woman from New Orleans. Mary had died in 1840, and Amos had brought Henri to Pin Oak, although by law the boy was free. Years later, Amos had made Henri overseer and put him in charge of pin oak operations, ordering, planting, harvesting, and selling crops. Henri had married Charlemae and they had a son. It was speculated that the family had plunged to their deaths in Tops River Falls in a failed attempt to escape the plantation, though their bodies were never found. Meanwhile, during the 1850s, the Underground Railroad was active in Tennessee. Through a network of conductors, runaways were led from one safe house to another until they reached free soil. All speculate that Henri might have made contact with Benjamin Stone. Conductors sometimes use old spirituals like "steal away" to send a signal that an escape was being planned. A cave located behind Tops River Falls was a well-known hiding place used by the Underground Railroad. Stone no doubt knew about it and might have told Henri the night before the planned escape. Perhaps Henri and Charlemae tried to make it appear as though they jumped to their death, while actually leaping to a hidden den ledge and crawling to safety in the cave. Stone could have then led them to the next station and finally to freedom. This explanation for the missing body seemed plausible to Olive, and she hurried home as soon as she bought the book to see if the facts supported her theory. As soon as she walked in the door, she threw off her coat and dropped in the middle of the floor. Excitement made her hands shake as she flipped the pages of her book, looking for relevant dates, names, and places. Pin Oak, here it is. As the last rays of sunlight filtered through the window, Olive turned on the lamp beside her chair and curled up with Benjamin Stone's diary. He wrote, "I only lost 3 lives as a conductor. They were a family. The man's name was Henri from Pin Oak Plantation. I was supposed to meet him in the woods, but for some reason we missed each other. I never got to tell him about the cave behind the falls."